Good afternoon. It is now 4:10 p.m. We are reconvening this meeting of the California Citizens Redistricting Commission. Before we went to the break, we were continuing our... Let me note for the record before going further that Commissioner Yao is no longer present. Before we went to the break, we were continuing our Outreach Advisory Committee report back and discussion regarding next steps on the scope of work and contract for CCP, the Center for Collaborative Policy. I do have one commissioner, Commissioner Ward, in the queue. Commissioner Ward?
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to, listening to all of this and understanding where the concerns are coming from, meaning that hard numbers are unavailable, all of the things that we're looking at, but also a realization that we need to move forward. I'd like to offer a motion at this time to go ahead and approve a not to exceed $100,000 limit award to CCP with the stipulation that the communications director, the outreach liaison, and the chair must all three approve the plan before the money's spent.
Thank you, Commissioner Ward. Do I have a second? Janice, could you please repeat that back? And we will pause until you're ready.
70?
I'm sorry, who was the third person that needed to approve? Could you just repeat
sure.
the last part of that?
The communications director, the outreach liaison, and the chair must approve any plans before they're awarded.
So there are a lot of people in the stack, and let me get my pen so I can make sure to follow in the correct order.
I second it.
Okay, so we have a second. There is a question, Commissioner Anchetta.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Was there still a motion on the table?
Yes.
The $70,000 was still on the table, was it not?
It wasn't a formal motion, was it?
I was not under the impression that had taken the form of a formal motion, and I might be wrong on that.
Yeah.
Okay, and that was by Commissioner Forbes and Commissioner Yao. Okay,
Yeah.
thank you. So we now have two motions on the floor.
An alternate motion.
Someone can withdraw.
I will withdraw my motion.
Thank you, Commissioner Forbes.
All right.
So again, we have one motion on the floor. It is Commissioner Ward's motion, and we'd like to restate it, please. We withdrew the motion from Commissioner Forbes regarding the $70,000 amount. So Commissioner Ward's motion is what is has been made and has been seconded. If you could please repeat it back to us.
Yes, that the Commission award a contract to CCP not to exceed $100,000, and that the Communications Director, the Outreach Liaison, and the Chair must approve any plans before they are executed.
Thank you. At this time, discussion, please. Commissioner Filkins-Weber.
Who's the chair at that? Who's the chair? Of the no?
Who's the liaison
No, who's the chair?
of the advisory committee?
Is it?
This chair or the outreach?
Well, I don't know.
I'm the chair of the outreach, and this is the chair of the commission.
Right. I wasn't clear on. There's one clarification on.
It's a great clarification, my mistake. Committee chair, my understanding was we don't have subcommittee chairmen, we have liaisons. So advisory committee liaisons. So
and the chair of the commission,
the acting chair,
whoever that will be at the given time, right?
at the time it comes up.
Okay. Okay.
Thank you for that clarification. Commissioner Filkins-Weber.
Commissioner Ward, I would like further clarification regarding the comments that you made earlier, which is what is the scope of what you're anticipating to be involved in their, in other words, their scope of work. Because I'd like to know whether there is some consideration for the possibility of a permissible, if it's within reason, DGS accepted parameter contract for the technical expertise that you will need for the content of the toolkit. So unless your intent is to just leave this overly broad and leave it up to those you've designated to understand what the commission's idea is. We've gone over it. I think we have a pretty good understanding, but I just want to know what your intent was. Is it to keep it broad and allow the designated individuals to understand what the commission's accepted, or do you intend on having at least a minimum designation such as what we already understand on page 18 of CCP's revised draft?
Commissioner Ward.
Thank you. Great question. My intent is that we all understand at this point that we've given new requirements, and that these new requirements have to be considered in the process in front of us. So we need to have some flexibility in that. We also need to move forward and commit. A goal is to have some subcontractors working for us so we can move forward over the next couple weeks. I had concern originally with the original number because being on the communications subcommittee, I know we haven't gotten there yet for the rest of the commission, but that we had already discussed setting money aside for things like a video, public outreach, things like that, we hadn't gotten the chance to reconcile with what's currently in this plan. So my concerns are alleviated by giving a pot of money that we make available for the people in the know, the outreach liaison, the communications director, and the acting chair, committee chair, to be able to go ahead and see whatever work product comes up between staff as a function of staff, and I'm confident that they can make a intelligent decision on spending that money.
Commissioner Filkins-Weber, additional clarification?
Just one other question. Are you leaving it open to them as part of this to allow for the possibility of at least one input hearing in March? Are you leaving it to their discretion? Because that it's whether the potential cost and what would be allowable per DGS and the potential cost of having the technical experts of two data gathering experts could impact this. And so I think we need to at least provide them just a little bit further direction because they need to tell us whether we're going to be limited by a DGS issue.
I'm sorry, I just want to answer. I didn't answer your question, and the answer to your question was, as Commissioner DiGiulio mentioned earlier, I'd like to limit my motion to strictly the outreach, and then take up your idea and consideration of that at a later time.
Commissioner DiGiulio?
Because it's my understanding that right now there is a technology consultant, as we had discussed with Mr. Douglas Johnson, for the educational component, which would include, since we're not doing workshops, it would be for the video and things. So they have access to Douglas Johnson for consultants for the educational component, whatever form that takes. The issue of the potential for the suggestion for the split and input, I think, is a separate issue that needs to be. In terms of this motion, I need to have it separated.
That was all
Mr.
I was going to say. I believe that there was a separation between the two, and that the technical consultant for this component is already taken care of.
Commissioner Ontai.
May I ask the two consultants to please go through this list for all of the commissioners?
I could do a real 30-second quick summary of what I'm thinking.
So let me clarify what you just asked for, Mr. Commissioner Ontai. You're asking for them to go through this?
No, you have a different list. This is one that just handed out.
And you're thinking on suggesting that?
Yes. They should have handed this outline in the very beginning before this discussion started. So many of the assumptions that were made were based on wrong information. So I'm giving them a chance to go through this so that we're all on the same page.
Thank you for that. I will say that we are very lucky that Marion Johnston has graciously rearranged her travel plans to be able to be a little bit more flexible this evening. So we do have a little more time to deal with this. However, this has already been a long day. So Commissioner Ward, you have one comment, and then we'll go to CCP.
I would just ask that my motion doesn't require that we spell that out. I'm just suggesting we set that to go through this in the hands of the three people I've designated in my motion. I don't think the whole commission needs to go through that at this point.
I'm sorry, before you vote, I'd just like to discuss the form of the motion for a moment.
I'm sorry, the form or the forum?
Form.
The form of the motion. Please go ahead.
As I understand it, and we'll get into these technicalities a little bit later, but we've delegated the full responsibility to a three-person body in the motion. If we could delegate the responsibility to, say, the chair after consulting with others, it would be a motion that's in compliance with Bagley-Keene. Rather than creating a three-person commission, my suggestion is give one person the decision-making authority, but ask them first to consult with the others.
Can I amend my motion, Chair?
Please do.
I'd like to amend my motion that the $100,000 be awarded to CCP at the approval of the chairman of the committee, after consultation. No, leave it there.
I'm sorry. I do think that next phrase, if you could elaborate on the rest of, I think you'll get enough questions if you don't.
After consultation with the outreach committee liaison and the communications director.
Okay. Thank you. Commissioner Yao is no longer here, so we do need a second on that motion. And if I could ask Janice to just read it back to us in its entirety.
Yeah, I'll second it.
You'll second? Okay. We have a second from Commissioner Aguirre. Janice, if you could please repeat it back.
That the $100,000 contract be awarded to CCP, and that any activities would be approved by the chair of the Outreach Advisory Committee after consultation with the communications director and the chair of the commission.
I do think there might be some changes to that motion. Commissioner Ward?
I'm sorry. It was the chairman. Approvals were made by the chairman of the Citizens Redistricting Commission after consultation with the Outreach Committee liaison and the communications director.
Okay. You want me to restate that? So,
Not to exceed 100.
okay. So the $100,000 contract be awarded.
Not to exceed.
Not to exceed. That the contract be awarded to CCP not to exceed $100,000, and that any activities would be approved by the chair of the commission in consultation with, after consulting with the Outreach Advisory Committee liaison and the communications director.
Mr. Miller, can I just confirm that that is in conformance with Bagley-Keene?
Yes.
Thank you. So I will invite CCP to say a few words, then it's open for discussion.
I just want to clarify with the way the motion is worded. My assumption and what you have in front of you, for example, the assessment, we are hoping that that is posted to the web on Monday and that we're soliciting response from the public. And then if you are interested in contracting with us, we would immediately start reviewing and analyzing the results. And the same with the communication. I have people calling me this week, you know, the chair people of policy committees of statewide organizations who say, can we have a call? We want to be involved. We want to help you. And I'm saying, well, let me see about scheduling something with you possibly next week. We're having this meeting. They're making a decision. And I just want to understand, is this precluding us from doing any of this work until there are additional approvals, or should we assume we should go forward with items 1 and 2, for example, and start thinking about the toolkit, or no, don't do anything until future approval?
Commissioner Ward, this is your motion.
Yeah. I totally sympathize with your position. But the problem is, as Commissioner Geary said, we spent 2 hours and we can't seem to, and taken a vote that failed, and we can't seem to work around the fact that there's too much ambiguity with where we're at. So this is an effort to try to put you in a position to be able to get somewhere. And it seems like we can only get that through at this point with some controls.
If it helps you feel any better, we do have a 24-hour turnaround policy for any communications between commissioners and staff. So there is still the possibility that this can get off the ground on Monday, pending the availability of incoming Chair Filkins-Weber and staff to make that happen over the weekend. Commissioner Forbes.
That was going to be my comment. I mean, it takes the chair in consultation with the, so there's no reason this can't happen, at least for those items immediately.
Commissioner DiGiulio.
Can I maybe suggest one slight amendment to that you said just the chair? Can it be, you said in consultation with the communication, since we could add two, can it be the chair and the communication? Because our chair is going to rotate. It's going to be hard for them to keep giving the information to the next chair. If we had one staff person who was consistently involved in that, is that a violation of Bagley-King in terms of working as a liaison? You have right now just the chair would approve it.
Could I ask our legal counsel to please weigh in?
I don't know if there's a value to that.
Mr. Miller? I think one thing that we do need to keep in mind is that the timeline for this is that these decisions would need to be made in the next couple of weeks, in which case there would be consistency of who is serving as chair. It would be Commissioner Filkins-Weber for the foreseeable future. So just to keep that in mind. And Ms. Johnston.
I really hate to be putting shackles on you after you finally get a decision of such an agonizing process, but the problem under the Bagley-Keene, if you form any group to make a decision, that becomes a public body and has to comply with the Bagley-Keene Act. If it's one person to make a decision, it's okay. You can have a two-person advisory committee to consult with, but you cannot have more than one decision maker. Is that clear?
That's clear.
Just make a follow-on suggestion on this subject, rather than being concerned about the rotating chair. Why not just delegate one person who will have that responsibility for this contract? Leave the motion as it originally was stated, and then notwithstanding the chair changing for this sole purpose, for this contract, leave that person the decision maker.
Commissioner Ward, again, it's your motion.
My thought process in selecting the chair of the committee was that it's already a part of their function to communicate with staff and communicate with the subcommittee liaisons. So I didn't see, unless I'm not a lawyer, but my thought process is that this is part of the chair function. I know when I functioned as chair, I had the ability to communicate with staff and with Communications Advisory Committee point of contact.
If I may have misheard, but I think the confusion arose. I believe the suggestion was that the commission chair. Well, it's the same, of course, whether it's a committee or the commission chair. You have that rotation. The suggestion, though, is regardless of whether it's the committee chair or the commission chair, for this purpose, don't rotate it. Leave the responsibility with that person to finish this agreement only.
Stick to your guns, Mike.
Unless there's a legal Bagley-Keene violation with leaving it with a rotating chair.
Just trying to reduce the number of people who have decision-making responsibility. If it ends up being two chairs, the president and the next, plus a consultant, then you've got three people.
Let me translate this, Commissioner Ward. What I'm interpreting Mr. Miller as saying is that rather than saying that the acting chair would be in that role, you would say, just anticipating that Commissioner Filkins-Weber is the incoming chair, that you state that Commissioner Filkins-Weber is the lead on this.
I understand. I just wanted to make sure that I was clear on the legal guidance that that it would in fact be a Bagley-Keene violation to delegate that function to the chair, even though it's rotating, because that is a part of their function as chair. I just want to make sure that I understand that that is in fact a Bagley-Keene violation, because if it is, then we continually do that as we rotate chair. Do you understand what I'm saying? There's processes there's a handoff of process that's handed off from incoming chair to incoming chair. So if the direction is now that that would be a Bagley-Keene violation, I'm concerned. I just want to get...
For this making this one decision, this one particular decision, which would normally be made by the commission as a whole, instead you're delegating it to one person with the advice of two others.
Thank you so much. And it would be a Bagley-Keene violation to do that contrary to that. Is that correct? Good enough. Then I amend my motion to Commissioner Filkins-Weber being the acting authority for this contract.
Could I request that we repeat the amended motion back?
So clarification, in lieu of chair of the committee, of the commission, it would say Commissioner, okay. Okay, so the motion, the amended motion is that CCP be awarded the contract not to exceed $100,000, and that any activities be approved by the chair of the commission, Commissioner Filkins-Weber. I'm sorry,
so my understanding is you should strip out the chair and just say Commissioner Filkins-Weber.
Okay, and I'm sorry, are we striking the in consultation with?
No,
part? No.
In consultation with.
In consultation with the Outreach Committee Liaison and the Communications Director.
Yes. Commissioner Aguirre, do you still second that?
Absolutely.
The floor is open for discussion. I'm hoping there will be minimal to no discussion at this point.
Minimal, so that my name was mentioned, and I'd like to know my responsibilities. Who is the advisory committee liaison? Okay, so Mr. Ontai, and that would be in consultation with Mr. Ontai, Commissioner Ontai, and whom else?
And Mr. Wilcox.
Thank you.
Seeing no further discussion, I'd like to open this motion up to any members of the public who would like to comment. Seeing no members of the public who would like to comment, I would like to take this to a vote, and we should do a roll call on this, please.
Clarification, is this a supermajority vote? Okay.
Yes.
All right. Commissioner DiGiulio.
Yes.
Commissioner Forbes.
Yes.
Commissioner Galambos-Malloy.
Yes.
Commissioner Parvenu.
Yes.
Commissioner Aguirre.
Aye.
Commissioner Commissioner Anchetta.
Yes.
Commissioner Blanco.
Yes.
Commissioner Dye.
Yes.
Commissioner Raya.
Yes.
Commissioner Baraba.
Yes.
Commissioner Filkins-Weber.
Yes.
Commissioner Ontai.
Aye.
Commissioner Ward.
Yes.
Commissioner Yao. The motion passes.
Thank you. Commissioner Ontai, I believe your time is up.
You didn't even use any of
Thank you.
Thank you. You've all been very good.
And thank you to CCP for hanging in there through our agonizing process.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. So at this point, our Public Information Committee has been so kind to be patient as we've gotten through our other committee report backs. What I would actually like to do is a bit of a departure from your report back immediately. I know Ms. Johnston has her presentation with Mr. Miller has been delayed for hours, and so I would suggest that given we anticipate their presentation, we'll take a little bit of time that we go ahead and do that. And then save the public information for afterwards. So thank you for obliging us in that regard.
Can I ask a point of going back to, we had tabled an issue that would have been raised earlier by Commissioner Filkins-Weber. Just to put it there, maybe it was not the time to readdress it, but I think there's some elements in terms of what's been suggested maybe by staff and commissioners in the split of input hearings. That may not need to be decided today, but it was an issue on the table that I think should be addressed before we leave.
Excellent. We can come back to that under scheduling. Mr. Miller and Ms. Johnston, please join us.
We don't want to waste a minute. First, let me introduce to the Commission Marion Johnston, who you approved earlier today as a retired Inuit who will be helping us and has already added a lot of value to our work. Indeed, we've been passing notes secretly back and forth to try and get a handle on the peculiar issues before the Commission. I'd like to tee this up with a couple of thoughts. Legal training is sometimes a euphemism for lawyers taking a group into the basement and threatening them with prison if they don't follow their advice, or a shorthand and alternative way of saying just say no. We've tried to bring a much different approach to this. We're not going to try to cover the whole lay of the land of Bagley-Keene. I know that's been done before, but the hypotheticals that you have in front of you have been developed to address actual problems that have come before the Commission or that we anticipate are likely to come to the Commission. And given the fact that we're essentially the only thing between you and freedom today, I want to start with what I think are the most important of the examples that have been created here. So,
Word of introduction to this whole concept of complying with the open meeting laws. A lot of times state bodies think that they're really horrible and unwieldy and stop you from doing things you want to. That's not the intent, although it may be the result. The intent is that when a body is acting as a public body instead of an individual, that there is always another place at the table for the public, and that the purpose of these laws is to make sure that that voice of the public is considered. So if you think of it in terms of a positive value that adds to your decision-making, maybe the agony of having to comply with these laws will seem a little bit less.
That's why we're styling this, getting the Commission's work done while complying with Bagley-Keene, as opposed to just say no. So we just had a discussion of number 5, or facts that implicate number 5, which is this 3-person rule and serial meeting rule. So let's start with that.
Okay. The rule under Bagley-Keene is if it is a body that is a decision-making body, then it has to comply with the open meetings laws. Except if it's an advisory committee. If it's an advisory committee of no more than 2 people, then it's exempt from the requirements. So, if it is a body, like a subcommittee, whatever entity it is, that's the entity that you consider. And the 2 or more rule is different than, some of you familiar with the Brown Act. Brown Act, anything less than a quorum can meet, and it's not a problem. But it is different for Bagley-Keene, and that's just the way the law is written, and you have to accept it, because that's nothing you can do about it. That's why we were suggesting that for reaching your arrangement to approve the contract in the last one, you give the authority to one person, who then can have a 2-person advisory committee to work with, but the decision-making is left with the one individual.
And the challenge is, it's so easy to fall into the situation of creating a formal 3-person body that gets you into the violation. So that's what we're trying to be cautious against, is creating a formal advisory committee that gets you right back into that 14-day notice rule that we have.
And let me just speak a little bit to the 14 days notice, because that's a bit draconian as well, and that is only applying to the Commission. Normal state agencies don't have that requirement. They only have 10 days, which in certain circumstances can be shortened to 3 days or even 1 day if it's an emergency. For local governments, it's an even shorter time. It's 3 days, 1 day, and 1 hour. There, the thought is to give people enough notice that they can attend the meeting. So if it's a local entity, there's no travel involved, so they don't require as much time in advance. For you all, because you're a statewide agency and because you're considered so important, that's why they gave you the 14 days. And you have no leeway in that. There's no emergencies, no special meetings, no nothing. It's 14 days or you cannot meet.
There's a provision, and it was not caught by the Prop 20 drafters, which is sort of the 3-day notice exception that's allowed. Would have been allowed around the deadline, but now the deadline was changed to August,
right? And
that part of it wasn't updated. And I'm not sure what we should do because I think that's probably a very good thing to have. And I think effectively we've lost it. I don't think we can interpret it to somehow change to August. It's got
well, the good news is that's statutory, not in the Constitution.
Right. So that is possible to be changed.
One possibility would be to get a statutory change.
And we can go to the legislature to do that with a super majority. Okay. Thank you.
Are there other questions? Yes, about this.
Just on your comment about the no emergency meetings, were there any exceptions under Bagley-Keene for emergency meetings that this commission would be privy to using?
No, because yours just has a flat 14 days. It takes you out of Bagley-Keene for purposes of giving notice.
Thank you. So in regards to the serial meetings that you were talking about, I guess I actually am a little bit unclear now, given our earlier conversation. The only thing I'm hung up on is, obviously we've adopted a rotating chair schedule. So take, for example, the budget. I think that's been an issue that's been on the plate now that we've been trying to get approved through at least 3 chairs. So the incoming chair gets a handoff from the old chair, communicates with staff, and then often the advisory or the liaison for the involved advisory committee. Through successive chairs, my understanding of what we talked about earlier would make that a serial meeting. Is that incorrect?
Only if decisions are being made. The problem is if a multi-member body is making decisions. As long as the decision-making rests with a single person.
Or it comes back to the full commission.
Or it comes back to the full commission.
Which takes us into number 2 here, which I think will be helpful.
Before we leave 5, I wish Commissioner Yao was here because
I know
you know his question?
Yes.
Will you address that? Okay, thank you.
We'll do a special tutorial with him.
Okay, all right.
I said number 2. That was a little. I mean number 2 under problem number 5, right where we were.
Okay.
This
happens if you get together for dinner, for lunch, like you probably do all the time. The concern is you would go on and discuss things that should be discussed in an open session, and obviously if you're sitting around a lunch table, the public doesn't have access to that, and there's no record kept of it. So these rules are in place to make sure you don't have a serial meeting where, without the public view, one person talks to another person, and agrees at a certain, and all of a sudden you've come to an agreement, which then may be formalized in a public meeting, but was actually formulated in this private session. So the real key is to avoid a formal committee meeting without notice and avoid any group of people meeting to take a position that then they present at a public meeting.
So let's slice hairs for just a minute here and go down the slippery slope. The risk, the thing we want to avoid is decision making. So we want to open the door a little bit here to let commissioners speak with one another. But you've got to be careful about a couple of things. You've got to be looking at who am I speaking with? Do I have a quorum of a committee among those that I'm speaking with? Then you're in an advisory committee situation that requires notice. So you have to stay away from that. And part 2 is, as Marion just described, if out of that informal conversation comes a decision, something that's pre-baked when it comes to the commission, that's improper. But if you avoid those 2 things with great care, you just want to get an opinion from somebody and stop with that, then I think that does permit some measure of communication that can be useful to you, at least individually, in a manner that we haven't expressly discussed before.
Commissioner Blanco, and then Anchetta, and then DiGiulio.
So there's two parts.
Microphone, please.
Two parts. No decisions made out of the full body, outside of the full body. And then there's the question of whether the group of people that, even if it's just a discussion and not a decision being made, but it's just a discussion, that group may actually constitute a state body.
Exactly.
And therefore it has to be publicly noticed. So there are two separate
That's right.
things. And so remind me what the sort of the triggers, the tests are for whether that has become a public body.
It's in Government Code 11-121. If it is a multi-member body that exercises any authority that may be delegated to it by another body, then that is a state body subject to the Act. The only exception is that an advisory committee that doesn't consist of more than 2 members does not violate the Act.
Okay, I am confused because that has the word decision in there.
First, any decision-making entity.
Right, so, but I'm talking about these
individual.
informal, I'm confused because there seems to be the decision-making branch of this, and then that the one concept is decision-making should be done publicly, but also meetings should be public. It's two different values in a sense. That a meeting be public, we have to define when a meeting occurs, and that's not just if it's a decision-making meeting, correct?
Well, it's if it's either a decision-making meeting or if it's an advisory committee meeting of more than 2 people.
So, and a clear example would be, let's take the Legal Advisory Committee. A quorum of that committee is 3 people. If they were to speak, any 3 people speak with one another on that committee, you've got a forum of the committee. A forum. You have a forum too, but you have a quorum of the committee, and as such, that becomes the necessity for a public meeting.
Okay, so if we're in this,
Just the discussion alone.
That's right, because you have a quorum.
Regardless of the decision.
Regardless of the decision.
And that's for advisory committee.
Right, but Mike, no.
This is for a formal committee that has power delegated to it. Correct. May not meet.
Okay, but this is so then we have these lunchtime, dinner time, hallway, water cooler situations, right?
All right. If it happens to be that a whole committee, say the Legal Advisory Committee, were to sit at the same table, they could not discuss legal committee matters.
Right, and it wouldn't just be decisions. They could not discuss it because it's not public.
Right.
If you don't have 3, then you can have a discussion.
You could have 2 and 2 and 2 have a discussion, so long as it doesn't become a serial meeting where you all agree that this is how you're going to vote when you get together.
Commissioner, do you have a follow-up?
Still not completely.
Let's finish that thought, because that's an important
That's
one.
an important.
So let's, if I could just kind of redistinguish.
Please do.
You have a committee. First, I think the simplest example is a committee of 4 people.
Mm-hmm.
If 3 of them are meeting about committee business or board business, that's a violation because that should be a public meeting. It's a quorum of the committee gathered. Independent of that, you have 2 members of 3 different committees. So no committee has a quorum present.
Assuming there's no 3-member committee.
Assuming there's no 3-member committees, right. No quorum present. And assuming that those 6 people are not making a decision.
Correct.
If they were to, they can discuss business, but not make a decision and not use that as a stepping stone to
go talk to someone.
To talking to others. I think the safest way to say it is no decision and it stops right there. But people have done some work to share points of view, inform one another's, and may bring some clarity to the task without bringing a decision to a task.
I think I understand.
Commissioner Anchetta, and then Commissioner
It's a lot
DiGiulio
like-
and Commissioner Raya.
About like future interest in estates.
That was third semester.
That's a law school, and as a law professor, I have to say, don't even mention that kind of stuff here, because they don't. I don't even remember that stuff, and I teach in a law.
Only the legal committee was really laughing at that one.
Anyway, that's a lawyer joke for some reason. I don't know why it's a lawyer joke. What's that funny? Well, I think you answered the question, and we don't have any three-person committees, do we?
Well, if
Finance and administration.
That's what I thought. Because
we did actually on legal,
now
we have three.
well, that's the question. Then.
Commissioner Forbes was also.
Yeah,
Right. So, let's say I am formally on legal, but budget and administration, finance and
Finance
administration.
and administration had a three-person committee. In fact, we actually had this exact situation where Commissioner Yao wanted to send me some of his budget assumptions, and then after I flew home, I sent him a note. I said, Peter, you better not send this to me because two of us are a quorum, so keep it until our next meeting. However, since then, Commissioner Ward has now joined our Finance and Administration Committee, so now we have four.
And that was why we stepped up when Commissioner Ward suggested a three-person committee to decide on the contract, because that is creating an ad hoc committee for that particular purpose.
Okay. That's fine. That clarifies my question.
Commissioner DiGiulio.
I think you clarified one of the questions, but maybe I've replaced it with another one. So initially, when you were talking about the decisions, I was a little concerned until you clarified the technical advisory committee. So if Commissioner Barab and I are meeting to discuss the technical advisory committee, which we have 5 people, I think, on ours, and we made a decision about what we're going to present to the rest of the technical committee. That's okay to make that type of decision in terms of what needs to be put on the agenda.
Right, but you can't decide how you're going to vote on it.
Correct. Okay. Now the other question is before it was our understanding that we could only liaison with one other person in another advisory committee. So it was Commissioner Antai and I between the outreach and technical. But you're saying we could actually have 2 from each just for the discussion purposes of clarity between the technical advisory committees. So it could actually be 4 people, 2 and 2.
That is our best advice, again, with the no decision-making.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so it can be more than 1.
And that is a bit of a change to give you greater flexibility than we've been operating
And
under.
that's just simply for discussion, no decisions.
Right.
Wonderful.
Commissioner Raya.
That was my question. Thank you. Wonderful.
Commissioner Baraba.
Okay, so we go to dinner tonight, and we're sitting around a table. Do we make sure that that we don't have everybody from the same advisory?
Either that or you just go to dinner and have a good time and don't discuss business.
Well, that's the question, though, is that things come up at dinner from time to time. Okay.
Yeah. Well, they do, and this is an act to prevent that.
I'll try to raise the level of my question.
Well, it goes back to having the member of the public at the table. They're not there when you're having that discussion.
Wait, won't do. Okay. So they were sitting around the table, but we've set it up so that there's never more than a quorum sitting next to each other.
Well, there's never a quorum. There's never a quorum.
Not just sitting next to each other, but in the same discussion.
Yeah, in the same discussion.
Yeah. So if I was only talking to Commissioner DiGiulio at dinner, is that okay?
Who's around you?
Right. Nobody else from our committee.
Yes, you could talk with them as long as you don't make decisions.
Yeah. Okay.
We're hypothesizing for this discussion, all committees have at least 4 people.
Yeah.
A quorum is 3, so 2 are fine to speak with each other.
And of course, this applies telephonically as well. Email, texting, everything.
Any form of communication. Yeah. And let me be specific, that includes emails. There was an amendment not that long ago to any kind of electronic communication, whether you tweet or Facebook or however you communicate.
If there are further clarifications on this point specifically, please jump in. My questions are really regarding the chair communication, so I don't want to preempt. Okay, seeing no other questions. So, scenario. as chair, we are tasked with crafting the agenda for any given meeting, which involves a two-way flow of communication, both commissioners that are sending or calling with suggestions for what should go on the agenda, and at times also then that means that the chair is identifying items that come up that need to go and be vetted at various committees. So as that communication is happening, I have two questions. One is, for example, say Commissioner Dye sends me something for the agenda, then I would typically work with my vice chair, in this case Commissioner Filkins-Weber, to craft the agenda. How do I navigate that? Because to me it would appear on its face there could be a violation there. And then the second is, if I task Commissioner DiGiulio with something that has come to my attention that seems best suited for the technical committee, and she wants to share that with her other committee members and actually put it on the agenda and share it in some substance, how do we do that, again, with avoiding these violations?
The way in my experience, most agencies deal with it is giving one person the authority to set the agenda, be it the chair or the executive director or whoever. Now, other people may suggest items to be included on that agenda.
Okay. So let me give another scenario. So, say, for example, I send Commissioner Blanco a detailed email saying this is a legal item that needs to be addressed in your committee. Can she take the content of that email and share it with anybody else on her committee, or just how does that information get translated into their
If she decides
agenda?
to put it on her agenda, then she could distribute it along with other materials distributed in advance of a meeting to everybody who's going to be attending the meeting, which then makes it a public document available to anybody who wants it.
Excellent.
This is so, but to add one more element to that, because this was an issue. Chairwoman Glomps-Malloy sent me some information to put on the agenda, but I did not share it with anyone else because I didn't know if I could. So you're saying that it can't. There were some ideas for suggestions for the agenda, and I didn't have an opportunity to vet it with anybody else, like with Commissioner Bravo, who was the other second person designated. So could I just talk to him about it? Or is that a three-way communication?
Does she just need to make the decision and put it on the agenda?
Right.
End of discussion.
And because you don't have any closed sessions, anything you put on the agenda and discuss becomes a public document, which makes you different than other agencies that could. I assume maybe you still would have the attorney-client privilege, that you could argue that would not become a public document. But normally, any document used for a public discussion becomes a public document.
Any other questions on this point specifically? Commissioner Parvenu?
So even if it's ambiguous whether or not that item should actually be placed on the agenda, an example that Commissioner DiGiulio just mentioned, without discussion, she can't discuss that or to even make the determination, I'm not certain if this should be on the agenda or not, or,
She can discuss it with people, but it has to be her decision.
Gotcha.
Okay.
So the discussion could happen with another commissioner. The decision would have to just rely slightly with myself.
place
As long as it's not with a quorum.
Okay, that's
Okay,
fine.
that's
Thank you for that
Thank you.
clarification.
Okay, one additional scenario to this, just to make sure I'm understanding. Commissioner Blanco emails me with an issue that needs to go on another subcommittee's agenda. I'm acting chair. I give that to Commissioner DiGiulio because that's where I feel it should reside in terms of the agenda. Because you are the decision maker. I'm just trying to see, is that a violation? Is that, because these are the types of things I think that particularly the chairs will be dealing with.
Just passing along information is not a violation.
Gotcha. It comes into the decisions.
Right.
Okay. Thank you.
You did mention, though, so long as it's not a quorum.
That's true.
So I would suggest on these committees that you bounce it off of one person. So you're not creating a quorum of bouncing it off of two, and suddenly it feels a lot like a meeting.
Commissioner Raya.
I have another question about the idea of passing along information, because I received an email, and it went to my personal email, regarding some information on translators. And I don't know if I asked a couple people if they received that email, and nobody said they did, except that Mr. Claypool did. So I didn't know whether I could just forward that to everyone. So that, I mean, it was just information. If you want to know about the law regarding the use of interpreters, go to this website. That's all it was. So I sent it to Mr. Claypool, but that's been one of my frustrations, and you've made that a little clearer about sharing information, because I always feel like I'm just playing catch up. If I wasn't one of the two people, I don't know what happened or what's going on until the day of, and then you get all your paperwork and try to read through everything so you can make some kind of an intelligent decision. So is that the appropriate way to treat something that comes from outside didn't come to me from a commission member?
That's really your discretion of how widely you feel you can distribute it. Unless you have something confidential in it. But if you do distribute it, for instance, to Mr. Claypool, it becomes a public document because he doesn't enjoy any privilege. So if someone were asked for his email...
I already do that.
But you're saying I could have just gone ahead and forwarded that email to all my fellow commissioners without a problem?
Yeah.
Although I think it might be a
Yeah.
better practice to send it to Mr. Claypool and let him forward it, so we, in a sense, can keep track of those things better. The result is the same either way, and we'll come back to this under the Public Records Act. All of these communications are public. The public has access to them. So you just need to keep that fact in mind when a decision's made to send them on, regardless of how it's sent on.
A while back, I watched a webinar from the Census Bureau, and I thought it was of value, so I sent it to all the commissioners. And then there was a question raised about whether that was okay to do. I thought it was a public webinar.
Right. As long as you're just distributing matter that's available to any member of the public, there's no problem with that.
Okay.
Commissioner Filkins-Weber.
Okay, and that's where we get into a fine line, which I was wondering. So if it's information that you receive from somebody in the public, and it's one thing, but aren't there fine lines such as, let's say that this email, for example, that Commissioner Raya received was further information regarding interpreters, and it came from a particular vendor. And let's say that she may have spoken in an open public forum regarding that vendor. If she sends it to Mr. Claypool, and Mr. Claypool then sends it to all of the commission members with what appears to be the intent that this commission, contract with that vendor, isn't that communication done in a form to solicit, a decision among fellow commission members? It's not just passing along the information. And that's what concerns me. I know there are fine lines here, and if that happens to be one of them, then please let me know. But that's where just forwarding the information to all 14 of us, we all know that it's going to be a public record, especially when we're using our Google email. But I'm concerned that dissemination, if it may lead or give the appearance of some influence in ultimate decision-making, or decision that might be influenced by one commission member, could appear to be a violation, couldn't it?
Perhaps in that situation, you should put a disclaimer on it. This is for informational purposes only. I'm not recommending either way. Well, you do have to consider it. But you might get a private communication that you would not want to share with the world. And then you should not send it to Mr. Claypool because it would become public. But if you get it on your commission email, it probably is public anyway.
I would just, one other distinction. If two commissioners are corresponding with one another about commission business on a private email, I think that's going to be considered the same as if it were on your CRC email.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Additional questions? Would you like to, you have prepared something formal for us, so.
Sure. Why don't we, Well, let's spend a minute on the PRA hypothetical. Which number is that?
8, 9, and 10.
That may be redundant of what we just did, but let's see, because this is something we haven't talked about much, and at some point it's going to be important. Number 9. Number 9 is pretty straightforward.
And I think you're already doing that. My understanding is every material that comes in, you post on your website.
But number 10 is the one that can become burdensome, and it may very well occur.
Now, there may be certain privileges that apply, for instance, attorney-client, or maybe it's some privacy issue that comes up. But in general, you should consider all your emails involving the commission be public records, because they may be asked for. If they're asked for, they have to be produced, if they still exist.
Could I ask, so what obligation are we under if we start receiving emails from the public? I'm assuming we need to forward things that are related to redistricting matters to you, and the rest we just keep in our account?
Well,
I just am anticipating, we've already received some things as a commissioners where organizations or groups, and I imagine individuals would maybe see this as a route for them to get information to us is via our emails.
If it's going to be information used by the commission, then it's a public record. If you keep it and don't distribute it to them, but it influences your own thinking, it may be a commission record. If you delete it and don't consider it.
I guess my point is, do we just forward that? We forward those to Dan because it's not our prerogative to re-forward it to everyone else for his determination?
That's whatever procedure you want to set up.
Yeah.
You want Dan to distribute them all?
What?
It probably makes some sense because it is, again, what Kirk has suggested as being a funnel so that we know what's coming in and what's going out.
I think the danger is one thing implicates another. We've got the other portion of the statute that precludes a commissioner from talking about, quote, redistricting matters, and we've talked to some extent about what that is. But if you were to receive an email about a peculiar issue in a district and you were to respond to that email in a substantive way, I think you've walked into that other problem. So,
I think
I'd avoid doing that.
Yeah, we all know not to respond.
Yeah.
I guess it's a matter of what do you do with that. This may come up, it may not. Maybe we, in our individual areas, we may have people that figure they can reach us individually with their suggestions. So at that point, we've read the email to some extent, we've received some information, we need to pass that along, so I'm assuming the law requires us then to forward it to staff for determination whether it needs to be distributed for everyone else.
I wouldn't say the law requires it. I would say best practice requires it.
It's a matter of us formulating what we think is a prudent approach as the law really telling us how to handle that. So why don't we suggest that you do that, and we'll see if we can fashion a more formal policy around the issue.
Please continue.
And we could use your input on it in terms of understanding the kinds of things that you are receiving, and so we got a little bit of sense of the universe of what we're dealing with. I think would help to inform any policy that's developed.
Mm-hmm.
I just have to say it. Email has always gotten people in trouble. I used one quick. Has anyone here ever done any choral singing? If you have, high school's good enough. What you want in that format is everybody coming in together and going out together. And if you come in early, that's called an unintended solo. You don't want that. What you want to avoid is the sarcastic email, the email that is, as if you were speaking to someone in the hall and not something that would be preserved and produced in a Public Records Act request. And it's just so easy to fall into the conversational approach in exchanging messages. But there is a real risk that those could see the light of day. So you just want to be extra careful when communicating on these subject matters in how you phrase things and what you say.
Feel free to continue with your scenarios.
I thought maybe we should talk a little bit about 3. 3, some discussion was yesterday about what happens if you're invited to participate in a public event. If it is a public event that is open to the general public, then you can go. And what you're allowed to speak on, reasonably construing what it means to speak on redistricting matters, is that you can't talk about the substance of the decision-making process that you're going through in drawing the lines. You can talk about the process. You can't talk about any opinions you formed, any possible results that may come out, but you can certainly describe who the commissioners are, what your task is, how far you've gotten in the process, those types of general questions. And there was one question I heard yesterday about what happens if someone sends you information. There's nothing wrong with receiving information that's available to the general public. When they talk about not participating in discussions, receiving information about it, they're talking about that's kept private, that's not available to other people.
At least that's our read of the statute. I understand you've gotten more restrictive advice than that in the past, and
you've got to read it reasonably.
And we think that's a better reading of what was intended here.
Okay.
So some conferences, I mean, we should obviously exercise the discretion, and maybe want to vet it with you in terms of just with the content of some conferences, a training conference, for example, I don't think that's a problem. Conferences where people may be end up talking strategy about redistricting, probably not appropriate for us to be there, and I think we'd want to look at any conference agenda and get a good sense of what's going on before we even
or participate in part of it and then leave when it becomes talking about those other issues.
Okay.
Commissioner Ryan?
Someone handing you a publication or a document that somebody else could just, go buy off the shelf or, email and get a copy, whatever, that would be
You may have
okay.
a gift problem, which is a whole different area. But it's no problem getting it, no.
Sorry I asked.
Let me get my wallet.
Yeah, really.
And then the last points were really from Rob. I don't know if Rob wanted to discuss the suggested answers he came up with to...
Before we go there, I think 8 is one that we've talked about, this business of meeting with less than a quorum of the commission has been, as I understand it, a concern. It's fine for subsets of the commission to meet in a public session. It's just obviously you can't take action because you lack a quorum. But I think that covers the problem of going to a mapping session and receiving input with only a representative number of commissioners being present.
I agree.
You said representative, not a number. I mean, do we have to...
No magic in that. Less than 14.
Okay.
Less than 9.
Less than 9, okay.
If all you're doing is receiving information.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt our flow. Rob, I think you distributed these Qs and As to the commission.
No, I'm working with these, and I didn't know they were going to be in here. We're working with these with the committee, and this is doesn't reflect some of the changes that one of our commissioners made, and it's only a beginning document. So
rip them up. Well, no, actually, now that they've been discussed in public session, they become part of it. You can stamp them draft, though.
Okay. But functionally, we should just ignore these for now. They're in the record, obviously, but we can just...
Well,
there will be...
You'll get a new one to us. Right?
Very soon.
It was an excellent first effort.
Any other questions? You want to just look over the other hypothesis?
It's not a hypothetical, it's a situation that's coming up, and I think I understand it, but I just want to know what the pitfalls, potentially. So because we're considering consultants for along with even staff attorney, but we're considering consultants to provide legal services on the Voting Rights Act. We're going to do the interviews in the advisory committee, which will be public. So the candidates will all be there. The public will all be there. The members of the committee will be there, and in addition to other commissioners who just want to sit in on that. And then we will make a decision publicly, because we have to do it publicly, as to the first cut. And then we'll take that to the, well, we won't make a, we won't be making a decision. We'll be making a recommendation that we take to the commission.
But that's a decision. That counts as a decision. To make a recommendation is to decide that you are recommending this person.
So can we do that?
You can do that because you're a committee and you've publicly noticed it and it's done in public session. Now, just a suggestion, I know that everybody wants to be involved in everything. If you get 100 applications and you as the chair, whoever the chair is, can see clearly that some people are not qualified, I would think that you could delegate to the chair only scheduling those people for interviews who at least meet some basic qualifications. So there's no obligation to interview everybody.
So, okay, so that's helpful. So we get 60 applications. You're the chair, or I'm the chair, or
Our current procedure would be that all 60 would, not the lawyers themselves, but the applications, would be reviewed in a public meeting of the committee.
I know.
And that's
I know.
fine. So the next step is if you want to build in a protection to make a decision prior to that time.
Right. So Ms. Johnson is suggesting that one person could actually say, we don't have to sit through 60 applications in this advisory committee meeting. The chair can make a decision to make a first cut before we go to the full.
If the committee has delegated that authority to the chair.
But my problem with that is I don't know that this commission has delegated the authority to the advisory committee to begin with, to then delegate from the advisory committee to even a chair on the advisory committee.
No, correct.
We haven't given decision-making power to the advisory committee.
And I'm actually less,
We haven't.
let me say
We
that I'm
haven't. We
actually
haven't.
wasn't envisioning doing that. I'm more concerned with your comment that the recommendation that goes to the commission is a decision.
Because
I mean, I just
it's
really want to
actually
understand that.
It's not just a decision, it's participating, deliberating, participating in any way. So the deliberation.
But we've cured the problem, though, by doing everything in a public meeting. So while that's correct, we don't have a legal problem as a committee because we're doing it all publicly. And that rule would preclude it from being done in private.
So
But isn't that recommendation without a quorum of the full commission? I mean, it's a decision. Can we make that decision in a advise? It's not a Bagley-King issue.
It's not a Bagley-Keene issue, it's whether or not you've been delegated that authority.
Okay.
Commissioner DiGiulio.
I think this is a good point, though. Have we, based on the scenario that the legal committee reported out earlier, their responsibility was to make decisions in the sense of they're going to eliminate some of the candidates for the full commission.
Yeah.
So have we a delegated authority for them to do that?
I understood that during that discussion, the commission approved the procedure that was recommended
Okay, I just want to make sure
by
we've
the
given them
committee.
that authority, because that's what
And that
I'd like
was part of what was in the recommendation, and it was approved. I mean, we didn't say, we didn't use the magic word delegate authority, but we said, this is what we'd like to do, and the commissioners voted on it.
Commissioner Felkins-Weber.
That was also under the understanding that any other commission member that's not on the legal advisory committee could always ask that another candidate come in. So there was some limitation on the full, without delegated authority, essentially.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's a process and procedure that I think was permitted, even though we are bound by other provisions under the Voters First Act that, as far as our ability to delegate decision-making to advisory committees, as I understand it. So
That's right. The act would not this is the Voters First Act now.
Right.
Would not permit the committee to make this particular decision because it's the retention of a consultant, and that requires the special majority.
And that's why my question was, if we're not recommending the retention, but by narrowing the field, there's some people you've decided not to retain.
Well, I think the Voters First Act refers to
Making a contract.
making the final decision about who's going to do the work.
Okay.
And that will be a decision of the full commission.
Excellent. Would you?
Thank you.
Are there other scenarios you would like to present for discussion?
One that may come up, depending on the availability of commissioners at some of these input meetings. If you schedule it for a public meeting and you do not have a quorum, you cannot convene the commission. But you could convene the members who are present as an advisory committee, who would then accept all the input. So even though you're trying to schedule them as full commission meetings, if it turns out because of people's schedules that just can't meet the quorum requirements, you can still receive the information.
Commissioner Wilkins-Weber.
you say receive the information. Would there be other limitations to what this commission could do at those input hearings as far as interaction with the public, any discussions? I mean,
you can ask questions, you can ask for clarifications, you can make comments. You cannot make a decision.
you can't make a decision, but is there a prohibition to a discussion? I guess there wouldn't be. So just because you don't have a quorum, you just can't make a decision, which we wouldn't be doing at input hearings anyway.
Because you're meeting as an advisory committee, but you've publicly noticed it, so it's okay to engage in the discussion.
And think, too, about this. Even if you had a quorum, even if there were a quorum present, I don't think we're contemplating making decisions at that stage. So I think it's fair to say you can do anything with two in these meetings that we would anticipate doing.
One other caveat that I think you may be aware of, I saw your sign-in sheet said it was voluntary. In your public meetings tomorrow, you cannot require people to identify themselves. If they want to speak without identifying themselves, that is their absolute right. So make sure that you make it clear to people that it's a voluntary process.
Do you recommend that before opening public comment sessions? As we drafted some procedures to remind the public regarding the decisions that we've made. Do you think it's a good custom and practice as part of our procedural to provide a notice that no member of the public is required to provide their name, even though they may see that other members of the public do so?
My concern was that you were scheduling people because they had submitted requests to speak. And so that was requiring people to identify themselves. If someone shows up tomorrow who did not fill out a request to speak but is there and wants to speak, they need to be allowed to.
Yeah, and that is our practice. And tomorrow we offered the opportunity to organizations who wanted to make more extensive presentations than would typically be allowed by our public comment rules for them to reserve time ahead. We also have several hours dedicated to public comment that can be anybody who comes in that wouldn't have to identify themselves.
Good.
Well, thank you for your attention at 5 o'clock on a Friday night to the intricacies of the Bagley-Keene and other acts.
Let's hope they stay tuned.
Excellent. So, how do commissioners feel like we can move into the public information report back without a bio break?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. So at long last, our
Okay, I have to open up my computer again.
Okay.
Okay. So much of what we were reporting on has been brought out, so we could really condense this, and I think I would let Mr. Wilcox report on what's been done, and if there's anything missing, then we'll fill that in.
Okay, thank you. And I want to thank the advisory committee for their work in working with me to make many of these things and accomplishments possible. Twitter, there was a Twitter feed that was started some time ago called We Draw the Lines. It's now in our possession to be able to tweet. I have been tweeting, and when you see me on my phone doing something, that means I'm tweeting. I'm not answering other email and surfing the web. I promise. So that's another way to give newsworthy information in a timely way. We are up on Facebook, a quick and easy way for the public to access information about the Commission, and content is being added daily. Redistrictingca.org is posting Commission information. As you know, we've been talking about this in our meetings, and I want to thank Common Cause for giving us a direct link so that we can post to that website. crc.ca.gov, our website. I want to thank the Secretary of State because this week has been putting a lot of information on and getting those presentations and requests for information and drafts up on the website. Commissioner Anchetta is actually on that website. And I want to thank. Yes, yes. And so our staff met with them, and of course, they have much on their plate, and they're really committed to helping us. And then we have these other networks that are helping us get information out. The Commission database, we now have control of our database and the ability to directly send messages out. The media list, we have identified the media database to be purchased, and of course that's going through the process. But I just want you to know that I have my list. I'm augmenting that as we speak. Nothing is going to not be done because I don't have that other database. So I'm very confident that we will continue here. It will be a help as we move along, especially as we're going into having the input hearings and wanting to make sure that we're covering all of the media in a certain area. But we are confidently moving forward. Editorial boards, we briefly talked about that, and you will be hearing from me next week. Some of you have already heard from me, and booking those up and down the state. And let me just tell you, the editorial boards are really setting a foundation for our relationship with these newspapers, and that you will come into a forum and talk to editors, maybe even the publisher, journalists, and even though they may not run out and write a story just that day, they now have the background, so when they're covering you, they've also met commissioners, been able to talk with you and interview you, understand who you are and what the process is. And at the end of the day, when they're editorializing, which may not be till the end of the process, that you've come to them and started a conversation very early on. We're maximizing the relationship with our outreach partners. I just want to say publicly to thank all of them, and they have I'm having regular conversations with them, and they've come forward to offer their help in any way that they can with their email lists and their websites and their resources. Media training of commissioners, really the conversations that I've had. I want to thank all of you for doing that. Right now I'm up to 11 out of the 14, and hopefully we'll be able to complete the others, but I thank you for that. Commissioner Gary had mentioned something that is actually in my report when he said that the census reached out to local officials, that it was very important in the outreach, and I think that putting into the communications plan government affairs, government outreach is very, very important, because they can be very, very key. And I've had a very good conversation with the California League of Cities, and we'll be reaching out to other government associations. The California League of Cities said we would love to work with you and offer our newsletter and our magazine and getting information out to members regarding meetings. And also they have 15 local organizations, for example, the Orange County League of Cities, that have local meetings that we will offer commissioners as speakers.
Rob, it occurred to me, you mentioned the census. One of the really successful programs was reaching out to the school systems. They actually created a curriculum for teachers to teach what the census is about. And usually when you get the kids talking about it, it really gets to the house. And so one might want to think about.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner Baraba. Frequently asked questions. We just heard about these. We talked about them in our advisory committee meeting, and we just started brainstorming and putting together a draft list. And we are completing more of those, and we'll have that available to the full commission this week, and it will be posted on our website. And I'm very confident about that because there's already frequently asked questions on there now, and this one can just replace those. And those frequently asked questions will also be part of press kits, and that's my next point that we are putting together, and we'll have before the first editorial board, which is on Wednesday, we'll have a press kit put together with a backgrounder on the commission and bios on the commissioners and the Redistricting California booklet, which is great, and they've offered to give us so many. Yes.
I'm sorry, you said bios on the commissioners?
Yes.
Where are those coming from?
The ones that are on the website.
There's errors in mine, and I just never bothered to get it corrected because there were problems with, dealing with BSA and then transitioning to SOS, and it was a low priority.
Yes.
So I would appreciate conference with me before you release any of those to correct some errors.
Well, could I ask commissioners to go through your bio and send me the correct what you want to see? And this came up in our committee about that someone had chosen a quote for you from, you had actually said it, but they chose it. If you want to change that quote, please do. Be comfortable with because we're going to send it out to a lot of people and a lot of news organizations, so please be comfortable with it.
Do you want to provide us a due date? You have a schedule in mind.
Yes,
so.
I would love by the close of business on Tuesday. Is that pushing everybody too much?
Wonderful, thank you.
Okay.
Can I get a new picture?
Seriously, the pictures, but seriously, if you're going to distribute those, I think some of us have some issues with them.
Oh, well, can I just say something? The bio I have in mind, I was not going to.
Mr. Wilcox has the floor, please.
I necessarily didn't decide to actually I didn't know whether I was going to put the photos on there or not. I thought it was more important the substance, yeah. Okay. The local headline news, Time Warner and Comcast. We talked a little bit about this, as a couple of commissioners have already done the Comcast one. I'm going to be asking many of the commissioners to also do the headline news interviews in their local communities. Time Warner will offer all commission meetings online, on video on demand. I don't know if you know that service, and so that's a lot. That's millions of households that will have access at any time to the commission meeting, and so I want to thank Time Warner for doing that. So I just want to say a couple of things about the conversation that happened before, is that tomorrow I'm looking forward to these presentations because I believe there are a lot of incredible organizations out there that have put together some pretty good outreach plans. I just watched it this morning, a really great video that I will send around from the Greenlining Institute. You'll probably see it tomorrow or hear about it. And I believe there are others that are doing some fantastic work out there, and I think that will also determine what our plans are going to be, because to be able to piggyback and to collaborate and to partner with these organizations is going to be great. I think that's it.
Any other members of this?
Can I just add one more thing? I'm
yes,
sorry.
Please do.
Yes, I didn't mention that also in the outreach with, and I see this really as two two steps here in the beginning. We're going out to the editorial boards right away, and then, we will also offer television and radio the opportunity as we go along to cover the commission and interview commissioners. But I also see that the big push will happen with all of that media up and down the state, especially in the communities that we are holding the input hearings, that big push starts the 14 days, it starts now, but 14 days before you have an input meeting, and especially if you have draft maps that are going to be posted at that time, that's when we're really going to get attention, and that's when we're going to go after the media and to make sure that that's out there to get the public out to those input hearings.
Great. Commissioner Blanco.
I know you. This must be in your plan, but if it's not, just radio in the Valley and in Latino communities is huge, much more than papers or TV. So when we get particularly to dealing with Valley and all of that, I'd really recommend that we do a lot of radio.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Commissioner Ward.
Thank you. Three things. Being on the Communications Committee, we'd had some discussion that maybe we clear up. I think for 2 weeks we've been wondering, and I've been horrible about following up, if the BSA database that they had accumulated contact data during the application process. I understand that was a wealth of data mining that was done there. Were we ever able to take custody of that?
Yes, we have it, and we are emailing to it.
Oh,
using
excellent.
it.
Well, thank you, BSA. And then through the course of the conversation today, it's kind of become evident that the communications director might be well advised to be a part of the outreach meetings. Is that something that the commission feels would be an appropriate thing to suggest or recommend to staff at this point?
Can you repeat what you just said, Commissioner Ward?
Yep. Right now, the communications director has no formal role in the outreach committee, advisory committee. And judging from the issues that arose today and seeing how the communications advisory committee and the outreach advisory committee have such blended functions, that perhaps the communications director ought to be a part of both of those advisory committees as a formal component.
Commissioner Ontai.
And I would totally invite that.
I accept.
Excellent. Mr. Miller.
Hey, I think if you're suggesting he becomes a member of the committee, that takes. Okay, I'm sorry.
No, that he participates. That he is at their disposal when they meet.
That's
an
excellent suggestion.
As a matter of fact, we've been very difficult having him pinning him down at our meetings. He seems to come and go.
And lastly, I was just wondering, Rob, if you could comment on any of our video discussion or DVD type discussions that we'd had, I think, 2 meetings ago, and how that might assist in our outreach efforts.
Yes, and I think the conversation that went on today, starting with Mr. Claypool with the budget this morning and some of the video ideas and going viral and the DVDs and the short videos, and of course in talking about CCP and what they might be doing, that we have several options, I think, at our disposal, and to make sure that they are available on, we're going to look at this to make sure that the message is the right one and that they're available to as many people as possible, and that it's, and I think that's what we're going to be working on immediately, to see what is going to be the first DVD, what is the process, and to get that message out there and to do it in the best way possible, in the economical way possible. Did I answer your question?
Thank you.
Okay.
Commissioner Dye.
Yeah, there were just a couple other things. One of the things that we thought was important was that this was under like the Where's Waldo kind of thing. Where in California?
I had this on here and I forgot.
Go ahead.
Can I just say that you will be receiving, and I'm working, and I just spoke to Christina today about you will be receiving, because we're going to have a historical calendar on what you have done so far, what speaking engagements and what media interviews, so the public can see that. And then and you will receive a document that you can fill in, and then we will put that together in a document that will be on our website, will be shared with the public, and then as we go along, we will be adding, and of course, just a reminder to all commissioners, when you have an interview, when you have a speaking engagement, please give me the details. I know several commissioners have done that, and I appreciate that, and just a reminder to do that. And then it'll be a rolling document that will provide all of you that you'll know what everyone is doing, and that the public will know where the commissioners are. And so where's Waldo? Is that the
Yep.
yes?
Yeah, the idea here is this will be important to show that we are getting out into communities, and who are we speaking to? We're speaking to classes, we're speaking to organizations, we're speaking to the media, et cetera. I think it'll be useful for us as well, just to kind of know, because we've been finding, I think, out by accident in many cases that, Gene went there and so spoke there, and so now we'll just have a single place where we can see that all.
And can I add one more thing, please? Also, what was discussed at the advisory committee, and which you will also be receiving from me, is information on how to set up your signature, so that we have a form signature on your email. On the information that it's consistent.
For what purpose?
I think for conformity, and that we have, if one commissioner has the address and information about the office and like if you could put something about the website, that would maybe be good, that it's consistent and that all commissioners have that same kind of
It's a
form.
communication vehicle. So, for example, we want to advertise our website or Twitter, et cetera, and we just want to make sure, so if email's going out from any commissioner, that information is consistent and communicates about the commission each time.
Mm-hmm.
We also, by the way, brainstormed.
I'm sorry. I want to know what Jody's, Commissioner Filkins-Weber's, your question or concern, so we can address
Do you
that.
have a follow-up, Commissioner Filkins-Weber?
Yeah, I have a problem with disseminating my signature.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. It's
electronic.
It's not a signature. It's just your
I
name
can
and.
understand. There is a capacity to do that. So
Oh,
you can
yes.
specify.
You know what? And
I'm thinking, wait a minute. Okay.
No, you know what? I shouldn't call it a signature.
Okay.
It's your name and information. That's just pro forma.
Your salutation. Okay.
Yes, yes.
You can do that, so that's
Yes.
why I was wondering.
We will not be
And it's
doing that.
20
And
to
thank you.
6, so, okay.
Thank you for clarifying that, and I'm sorry for using the word signature.
Commissioners Ontai, Ancheta, and then Dye.
I'm glad you clarified that. I don't want people forging my checks. Rob, are you contacting the public universities or colleges as well? Student bodies, would they be interested in what we're doing?
Absolutely, and that is part of our media outreach. Is when we're talking about print media, we're also talking about the college radio stations and the college newspapers.
Great. And how about KPBS or public television?
Absolutely, and public radio and public television is all part, and we're also talking ethnic media and the different multi-language radio and television.
And then regarding minority press or media, San Diego, for example, how do I know you're contacting the right ones? Do you have a list we can check? Like in San Diego, we have the Voice of San Diego, which is a African-American newspaper, La Prensa, Mabuhay, Asian Journal, all in San Diego. How do we know you got that down on your list?
Well, the Voice of San Diego is the website. I don't think that's the African American.
No, there's actually a newspaper called.
Oh, there's that, but there's also the Voice of San Diego,
yeah,
which is the website.
Yeah, it's confusing.
So Well, that will be also, that I'm compiling that now and the information. Let me say this. I want to rely on commissioners in areas. I'm going to be relying on other groups, many of our outreach groups, to make sure that I am contacting the right ones, and that we're looking at circulation, especially when we're looking at sending commissioners out to a newspaper or ethnic newspaper, that there may be several, especially in Los Angeles, for one ethnic community, and you want to make sure you get the right ones. So there are many factors that I consider in making sure that I get the right one, but I would also like the input of commissioners from their local communities.
Mr. Wilcox, just a process suggestion on that. Then, are you suggesting that we all flood you with emails? Will you have, say, for example, a Google spreadsheet set up where we can go in and add contact information? What would be, or would you like to have some time to think on that and get back to us on how we give you that information?
Yes, I would like some time to think to make sure we set that up.
We'll look for an email from you. Commissioner Anchetta, and then Dye, and then I believe Filkins-Weber? No? Okay. Anchetta?
Yeah, and I was going to underscore that very same point regarding the ethnic media. And to the extent you can have a master spreadsheet, and all of us can take a look at it, and not to overwhelm you, but have some input, that would be great. Just going back to an earlier point regarding, and I guess it was framed in terms of the email signature, but just a question in terms of what information is being made more public than others. Obviously, website, Facebook, Twitter, address of the commission offices, I presume, is fairly well publicized.
Yes, it is.
Telephone number of the commission office.
Yes.
Okay, so this is a question, I guess, for the email signature. So email addresses of commissioners, what level of public awareness or publication of that is how is that?
I'm not. I am not aware of any publication of your addresses, and I don't see.
I'm not suggesting that either, but I'm just wondering what.
No, and I don't see any.
Okay.
I would never be doing that.
Oh, that's fine.
So yeah,
I just want to be sure. And also, a number of us, or most of us, have BlackBerry numbers. Same question. Level of any publicity, if any, regarding those numbers.
I have. I'm not publicizing them. I have noticed that commissioners at the bottom of their email, that some of them have their phone numbers listed, and that's why, when you get this to set up how you want it to look like, if you wanted to, we will give you options. If you wanted to add your personal contact information on that, you could do that. But that will be up to you. It will be your choice.
Commissioner Dye.
I'm sorry, just a last point. Just a point to some maybe the commissioners want to think about this, but I have no problem with sort of the personal discretion of giving out the number. I don't know as a policy matter if there would be any concerns about some commissioners giving out their numbers and others not. Just to raise the question about whether putting phone numbers out publicly is a good thing or a bad thing. But at this point, I'm happy to let it be up to the discretion of the individual commissioner.
Mm-hmm. Commissioner Dye.
Yeah, I was just going to mention one more thing that we brainstormed in the committee, which was we discussed possibly using a tagline for the commission.
Thank you.
On the We Draw the Line site, it was Real Power for Real People, which was more about the selection process, and we didn't think it was specific enough to kind of get at what we're trying to do. So we brainstormed a lot of concepts that we have now left in Mr. Wilcox's capable hands to see if there's something that resonates there. And this might be something that, would be part of a signature or would be on the back of a business card or something like that.
Commissioner Parvenu.
Yes, I'm certain that in committee you all brainstormed all these ideas. One suggestion, I'm not certain if you touched upon this one, but C-SPAN 1 and C-SPAN 2, they cover governmental affairs. We could possibly offer broad, nationwide attention to some of our meetings here, because what we're doing will eventually have national implications. And in terms of brainstorming songs, John Lennon has one called Power to the People. The Ohio Player has one called Power to the People, too. We got to give more power to the people. as theme songs for perhaps radio announcements, background.
Are there any more questions or comments for the Public Information Committee or for Mr. Wilcox? Excellent. Thank you, Mr. Wilcox and Public Information. We are really on the home stretch, Commissioners. Much of what we have ahead of us is administrative in nature. However, I do need to suggest that we take a 5-minute bio break before we tackle those items. So we are on recess for a 5-minute stretch and bio break. We will reconvene at 5:55.